If you have ever felt a specific kind of relief when the temperature drops, when the sky goes gray, when the days get shorter, and the world gets quieter, you have probably also spent time wondering why. And more importantly, you have probably spent time trying to explain it to someone who looked at you like you just said something deeply wrong. And what I want to tell you is that what you have been feeling is not a quirk, and it is not pessimism, and it is not something that needs fixing. It is your nervous system doing something very specific and very intelligent, and by the end of this video, you will finally be able to explain exactly what that is. Drop a comment right now and tell me, does winter feel like relief to you or like permission? Because the difference reveals something very specific about how your brain is actually wired. But before we get into what your brain is actually doing during winter, I need to address something that is rarely said out loud about the people who feel this way. And it is the reason that most of them have spent years quietly assuming something was slightly off about their preferences, when in reality the opposite is closer to the truth. And it starts with a misunderstanding about what kind of experience summer actually is for certain nervous systems. Most conversations about seasonal preferences treat them like simple aesthetic choices, the way some people prefer mountains and others prefer beaches. But the neuroscience of sensory processing tells a more specific story than that. Human nervous systems differ meaningfully in something researchers call sensory threshold, which is essentially how much environmental input the brain can process before it begins to experience strain. And summer, for all its cultural celebration, is an extremely high season. The heat is a physiological stressor that measurably elevates cortisol levels. The intense, unfiltered light can trigger real discomfort in people with even mild sensitivity. The noise level of public spaces increases dramatically. Outdoor equipment, children, lawn machinery. The social obligation density spikes because culturally good weather is treated as a reason to gather and be visible. And for a nervous system that sits toward the more sensitive end of the sensory threshold spectrum, this does not feel like abundance. It feels like a sustained demand that never fully lets up. And the relief that arrives with cold air is not a mood or a personality quirk. It is a measurable reduction in the total sensory load your brain is being asked to carry. And for some people, that reduction is not just pleasant. It is the difference between feeling functional and feeling like you are spending every day slightly underwater. And here is the part that reframes everything about how you might have thought about this preference. One sentence to carry with you. For some brains, summer is not a season, it is a sustained sensory demand that never clocks out. Because there is a specific thing happening in the brain during high sensory load environments that explains not just why summer feels harder, but why winter feels actively restorative, rather than simply less bad. And this distinction between less bad and genuinely good is the most important psychological line in this entire conversation. And before we go there, drop a comment telling me what specifically about summer drains you the most. Is it the heat, the noise, the light, or the social expectations? I read every single one. Brain researchers studying environmental psychology have documented something that matters directly here. When sensory input drops below a person's strain threshold, the brain does not simply go quiet, it shifts into a mode of deeper internal processing. The default mode network, which is the neural system responsible for self-reflection, memory consolidation, creative thinking, and meaning-making, becomes significantly more active. And what this means in practical terms is that winter for certain nervous systems is not deprivation, it is the environmental condition that finally allows the brain to do the internal work it has been trying to do all summer while constantly being interrupted by the outside world. This is why people who love winter often describe feeling more themselves in those months, not because the cold has some magical property, but because the reduction in external demand creates space for the internal version of them to actually surface. And this is also why winter preferences are not correlated with being unhappy or antisocial or avoidant. They're correlated with having a rich and active internal life that functions better when the external noise recedes. And here is the thing that makes this especially interesting. This experience is not limited to introverts, because what researchers consistently find is that the key variable is not how social someone is, it is how sensitive their nervous system is to environmental stimulation. And those are genuinely different things. A person can be warm, outgoing, and socially engaged and still have a nervous system that genuinely thrives when the world turns down its volume. One sentence to carry with you: winter does not empty the brain, it finally gives the brain room to be full. Modern life in the Western world runs on a specific set of cultural expectations: productivity, visibility, momentum, doing more, showing up, being seen, and summer amplifies every single one of those expectations. The long days feel like a moral argument for filling every hour. The sunshine carries an implicit message that sitting still is wasteful. Even your leisure in summer is supposed to look effortful. You're supposed to have plans, to be outside, to be social, to want things. And there is a quiet guilt that accumulates inside a sunny Saturday spent doing nothing, because culturally, every hour of summer daylight feels borrowed. and any hour you do not fill feels like something you wasted, and winter cancels that entire debt in a way that no other season can. The darkness arrives early, and the cold gives you a reason to stay in, and the world implicitly agrees that slowing down is acceptable, and this creates something that psychology researchers call an external permission structure, which is an environmental and social signal that certain behaviors are now allowed. And for people who are chronically hard on themselves, who struggle to rest without justification, who feel guilty when they are not being productive, winter is the only season that hands them that justification completely for free. And this is the layer that most people cannot put into words when they try to explain why they love winter, because on the surface they say they just prefer the cold, but what is actually running underneath is closer to something like winter is the only time of year I am allowed to be a human being instead of a productivity metric. One sentence to carry with you: summer asks who you are performing for, and winter is the only season that lets you stop answering. Research on personality development shows that two things tend to happen as people move through adulthood. First, sensory sensitivity often increases with age, meaning the environments that felt merely loud at 25 feel genuinely overwhelming at 45, and second, self-awareness increases, which means people become more accurate at identifying what environments actually work for them, rather than just tolerating what they think they are supposed to enjoy. And both of these shifts point in the same direction, toward a deeper appreciation for environments that reduce demand rather than amplify it. And this is why the pattern you see in comment sections on this topic is always the same person after person writing some version of the older I get, the more I need this. And what they are describing is not a retreat from life. They are describing an increasingly accurate understanding of what their particular nervous system needs to function well. And there is something worth sitting with here, which is that cultural messaging consistently tells people that the preference for quieter, slower, lower stimulation environments is a sign of something wrong, a sign of depression or avoidance or giving up, when the research actually shows the opposite. People who can accurately identify and seek out the environments that work for their nervous system demonstrate stronger emotional regulation, higher creative output, and greater overall life satisfaction than people who chronically override their own environmental preferences. Meet social expectations. One sentence to carry with you: the older you get, the less energy you waste pretending that loud and busy feels good when it never actually did. And once you understand that permission structure, something else about winter preferences becomes clear, and it is the part that explains why this tends to deepen as people get older, and why the people who feel it most intensely are often not the ones who dislike life. They are often the ones whose inner life is richer and more detailed than their outer presentation. Research on personality development shows that two things tend to happen as people move through adulthood. First, sensory sensitivity often increases with age, meaning the environments that felt merely loud at 25 feel genuinely overwhelming at 45, and second, self-awareness increases, which means people become more accurate at identifying what environments actually work for them, rather than just tolerating what they think they are supposed to enjoy. And both of these shifts point in the same direction, toward a deeper appreciation for environments that reduce demand rather than amplify it. And this is why the pattern you see in comment sections on this topic is always the same person after person writing some version of the older I get, the more I need this. And what they are describing is not a retreat from life. They are describing an increasingly accurate understanding of what their particular nervous system needs to function well. And there is something worth sitting with here, which is that cultural messaging consistently tells people that the preference for quieter, slower, lower stimulation environments is a sign of something wrong, sign of depression or avoidance or giving up, when the research actually shows the opposite. People who can accurately identify and seek out the environments that work for their nervous system demonstrate stronger emotional regulation, higher creative output, and greater overall life satisfaction than people who chronically override their own environmental preferences. To meet social expectations. One sentence to carry with you: the older you get, the less energy you waste pretending that loud and busy feels good when it never actually did. And there is one final piece of this that almost nobody talks about, and it is the most practically validating part of everything we have covered, because it directly addresses what is actually happening in your brain when summer triggers anxiety, and why that response is far more common and far more documented than most people realize. There is a recognized clinical pattern called summer onset seasonal affective disorder, and it is less studied than its winter counterpart, but it is documented, real, and estimated to affect a meaningful portion of people who experience seasonal mood changes. And what makes it especially worth knowing about is that it does not look the way most people expect seasonal depression to look. It does not present as low energy and withdrawal. It often presents as anxiety, irritability, disrupted sleep, and a general sense of overstimulation that never fully resolves. And the triggers are well documented. Extended daylight disrupts circadian rhythms in people whose brains are particularly sensitive to light exposure. Heat increases cortisol levels, which mimics a physiological stress response. The increase in social density and social obligation creates sustained interpersonal demand on nervous systems that need more recovery time than summer provides, and all of this means that the anxiety people feel as February ends and the days start getting longer is not irrational, and it is not a character flaw. It is a nervous system accurately predicting that the conditions it finds most depleting are returning. And for those people, winter is not a mood or an aesthetic. It is genuinely the part of the year when their brain chemistry and the external environment are finally aligned. And subscribe right now, because the next video goes into something that connects directly to this, the specific environmental conditions that different brain types need to do their best thinking, and why most people spend their lives working in the wrong ones. One sentence to carry with you: if spring arriving makes you anxious instead of excited, your nervous system has been telling you something important all along, and it was right. And there is one final thing worth saying before this ends, and it is the only practical thing you can actually do with everything we just covered. And it is the thing that most people who feel this way have never given themselves explicit permission to do. Your preference for winter is not a personality flaw, and it is not avoidance, and it does not need to be justified to anyone, because the science is clear. Your nervous system is not broken. It is calibrated, and calibrated differently is not the same as calibrated wrong. So stop apologizing for it and start protecting it, because the environmental conditions that let your brain actually function the way it was built to function are not a luxury. They are a requirement. So hit the like button right now. If this gave you language for something you have always felt, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next video goes into exactly which environments different brain types need to do their best thinking. And drop a comment right now and tell me, what is the one thing about winter you could never adequately explain to a summer person? I read every single one sentence to carry with you. Winter is not the unsubscribe button. It is the out of office reply your nervous system has been trying to set for years.